Hi everybody, it's Miss Rodriguez here to bring you a story of the week. Boys and girls, it is April National Poetry Month, and I'm sure you've been talking about learning about poetry with your teachers. Last week we did Shel Silverstein and some of his famous poems, and this week we're going to talk about this book, A Poem in Your Pocket by Margaret McNamara, and illustrations by G. Brian Karras. And every third week in April, it is actually Poem in Your Pocket Day. So if you look here, this is the inside cover, and you see some pockets with poems inside. This is the copyright page with the dedication, and I love this part of the dedication. The author and artist wish to express their gratitude to the students and faculty of Greenwich Academy in Greenwich, Connecticut, for inspiring many of the Poem in Your Pocket Day activities in this book. So boys and girls, some of these activities really did happen at a real school. So what genre do you think this book is? Yes, you're right, it is fiction. But what kind of fiction or fake story is this? Realistic fiction, because it could actually happen and might have actually happened in Greenwich Academy, just not exactly the same way with the same kids, so it would be realistic fiction. Great job. Give yourselves a pat on the back. I like looking at the copyright to see that it was made in 2015, which is, about 5 years ago. And I like seeing what the illustrations are made from, and these illustrations are made from acrylic paint and colored pencil. So are you ready to get started? When I put the book into this presentation, I did accidentally cut off some of the words. But I'm going to read you the story, and your job is to follow along and to look at the illustrations, because one skill that we've talked about is that illustrations help tell the story. So just sit back and listen and enjoy this story. Mr. Tiffin's class had never had an author visit them before. "Emmy Crane is a poet," said Mr. Tiffin. "And she doesn't know it," said Robert. "Not all poems rhyme," said Eleanor. "Miss Crane is coming to visit for Poem in Your Pocket Day," said Mr. Tiffin. "We're going to write poems of our own and put them in our pockets." "I am going to wear my jeans with 6 pockets that day," Eleanor whispered to Molly. "I'm going to have a different poem in each one." "I'm sure your poems will be perfect," Molly whispered back. Eleanor thought it would be too show-offy to agree, so she didn't say a word, but inside she nodded. Eleanor got to work. All during March, she studied poetry. All during April, the class caught up with Eleanor. They read poetry books and learned poems by heart and wrote poems in their poetry journals. Every day, there was something new to learn. So boys and girls, this is Eleanor. She is obviously the main character, and we're going to follow her story. And as you can see, she was very excited about this in the beginning. Let's see if her mood and feelings change. Mr. Tiffin taught them about similes, and then they tried them out. "Robert is as tall as that really high building in the middle of town," said Robert. "Math is like a knot," said Tara. "One that we can untangle together," said Mr. Tiffin. And here it says, a simile compares two different things using like or as. Then they worked on metaphors. A metaphor is a comparison saying one thing is another. "Recess is an ice cream cone on a hot day," said Alex, "even in April." "Homework is a belt that's too tight," said Jake. "Do you have a metaphor, Eleanor?" asked Mr. Tiffin. "I'm coming up with something amazing," said Eleanor. "I'm just not ready to share anything." "Eleanor is a library," said Tara, filled with silence. The class read poems that look like pictures. These are called concrete poems, said Eleanor. A concrete pumpkin seed, said Kimmy. And then they read a whole lot of funny poems. Hey, who knew poems could make you laugh, said Jake. I didn't know the name for these, said Eleanor. Woo, said Molly. So boys and girls, this is a concrete poem that is written in the shape of what it's about. And this one is about a pumpkin seed. And as you can see, it's written in the shape of a pumpkin seed. There is only one way to find out how many seeds are in a pumpkin. Count, 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 count. And this is just a plain old funny poem that if you read again and again, you realize is really interesting. Mom's Complaint by Jake. We're out of apples, kids, again. Don't eat so many, please. They're costing me a lot of dough. You think they grow on trees? The class read short poems. These are called haiku, said Eleanor. Little poems could say a lot, said Charlie. They read puzzle poems. These are called acrostics, said Eleanor. They're fun to figure out, said Jeremy. So here's Jeremy's haiku. No more gray days with a poem in my pocket, bright, secret rainbow. And here's their acrostic, and if you look going down, it's Tiffin, and everybody wrote this for Mr. Tiffin, their teacher. Teacher, interested, friendly, fun, impressive, nice. Tiffin. One bright morning, Mr. Tiffin took the class outside. What do you see? He asked. Use your poet's eyes. Everyone looked around. Buds are like tiny red firecrackers, said Charlie, waiting to explode into flowers. Sadness is a cracked sidewalk, said Tara. Very nice, he said. Miss Crane will be so impressed. He noticed that Eleanor was being very quiet. How about you, Eleanor? What does your poet's eye see? Eleanor wanted Miss Crane to be impressed with her, too. I'm still thinking, she said. On Friday afternoon, Mr. Tiffin brought everyone in class a small brown bag with a surprise inside. Sneak a peek inside your bags and then write a poem about what's in there. But don't tell anyone what you're writing about, he said. We'll do our best to guess. The class took out their poetry journals and got to work. Then they read their poems out loud. Alex guessed that Jake had a pebble in his bag, and she was right. Kimmy guessed that Molly had a glass animal, and she was right. She could even tell it was a horse. No one could guess what Eleanor had in her brown bag. Her journal page was clean and blank. This shell is too perfect to write about, she said. Well, try again when you get home tonight, said Mr. Tiffin. And remember, poetry is a messy business. And there's Eleanor, starting not to feel as excited and confident as she was in the beginning of the story, huh? She's kind of having what we call writer's block. And when Mr. Tiffin says that you need a poet's eye and that writing poetry is a messy business, he's saying that poetry is not like other kinds of writing. You have to use your imagination and you can break the rules a little bit. You can use any kind of capitals, lowercase, punctuation you want, but you should be creative. On Saturday night, Eleanor tried to finish her brown bag poem. She wrote 7 drafts and she only liked 1. When she woke up in the morning, she read the poem she liked. This stinks, she said. On Sunday night, Eleanor wrote 6 haiku with a total of 3 metaphors and 2 similes. She smiled as she went to bed. In the morning, she looked them over. These are not poetry, she said. By Monday night, Eleanor was worried. She wrote 11 rhyming poems. The next morning, she threw them all off her desk. Today is Poem in Your Pocket Day, she said, and I don't have anything that's good enough. Eleanor's eyes stung as she got ready for school. She wore a dress with just one small pocket, with nothing inside. The day was gray as Eleanor's mood. Ooh, a simile. So boys and girls, do you remember what she said she was going to wear in the beginning of the story? She said she was going to wear her jeans with 6 pockets so she could have 6 poems. But today's the day, and she's wearing a dress with 1 little pocket and no poems. The whole school was decorated for Poem in Your Pocket Day. There were pockets on the doors and poems in the pockets. There were pockets on the lockers and poems stuffed in those. There were rolled up poems and stapled poems. There was a poem written in chalk on the sidewalk, but that one had run into the rain. All the students had poems in their pockets except one. Eleanor worked on her poem at recess. She worked on her poem in the girls' room. She even worked on her poem during science. But the more she worked, the harder it was to think. At the end of the day, the students gathered in the gym for the poetry assembly. Mr. Tiffin told the whole school that Emmy Crane was a great American poet. He led her to the stage, and she sat down in the author's chair. "She looks like a queen," said Molly. "Oh, she's perfect," said Eleanor. Emmy Crane read some of her poems aloud. She told the students what it's like to be a writer and answered their questions. "Do you make a lot of money?" asked Robert. "Just enough," said Emmy Crane. "Where do you get your ideas?" asked Charlie. "From everything I think and everything I feel," said Emmy Crane. At last it was time for Mr. Tiffin's class to read their poems. Eleanor could hardly breathe as her classmates went up onto the stage and pulled their poems out of their pockets. Charlie recited his poem. Emmy Crane grinned. Robert shouted his poem. Emmy Crane winked. Tara whispered her poem. Emmy Crane nodded. Finally, it was Eleanor's turn. She looked at Mr. Tiffin. "Would you rather not read your poem?" he said. Eleanor could not even speak. "I wanted my poem to be perfect," she said to Mr. Tiffin, "but I have nothing in my pocket, nothing at all." "Well, you don't have to go up there," said Mr. Tiffin. "I can't disappoint Emmy Crane," said Eleanor. Eleanor walked slowly up onto the stage. She looked out at all the students and all the teachers and at Emmy Crane herself. "My name is Eleanor," she said in a tiny voice, "and I don't have a poem in my pocket. I tried and I couldn't get it right." "Come over here, Eleanor." Emmy Crane smiled, a small smile, as Eleanor walked closer. "No poem is perfect," she said, in a voice only Eleanor could hear. "I've thought of so many things," Eleanor told Emmy Crane, "but they're all in my head." "Tell me what you've been thinking about, Eleanor," said Emmy Crane. Eleanor closed her eyes and thought about the poem she wanted to write. "I have a poem," she said, "in the pocket of my mind." She remembered the poetry book she had studied at the library. "It's neat and perfect there." She used her poet's eye. "As delicate as a shell and as sturdy." She thought about the treasure in her brown bag. "It has mysteries hidden inside." Then she thought about her blank journal page. "But when I try to write it down, the words disappear." She pictured the poem on the sidewalk that morning, like chalk on the sidewalk in the rain. Then she opened her eyes. At last Emmy Crane spoke. "That's a poem in itself," she said to Eleanor. "Those are words from the heart, and the words from the heart are where poetry begins." Eleanor stepped down from the stage, and the assembly was over. Everybody clapped and cheered for Emmy Crane. Eleanor was feeling too much to cheer, so she cheered inside as loud as she could. So if you read that back and you just look at what she actually said and not what she was thinking, it was a really cool poem. Here are Eleanor's tips for poems. Poetry does not have to rhyme. Poems can come to you at any time. Follow your ideas wherever they may wind, and keep a poem in the pocket of your mind. And then the back cover is just like the front and side cover with cute little pockets with poems. At the end of the story, she was back to being confident. So she went from being confident to nervous and disappointed to being confident again. I hope this book inspires you to write some different kinds of poetry and share it. Thanks for coming. Bye, everybody.